So I've actually been working on this speech for 25 years. Literally, you'll laugh. It is true. This is the first time I've given it. And I started work on it 25 years ago, asking myself a question. I'd started a company called Synamics, and we build mass calling platforms for telephone companies. Big, expensive systems. You know, the orders we'd get were in the $1 million range on a regular basis. Not regular enough to make people tremendously happy, but well enough to earn profit and grow and do very nicely as a company. But we introduced over the space of 15 years where I ran that company, a whole series of products. And some of them were barn burners, really successful, and other ones were abject failures. And so I started trying to figure out why in hell's name is it that some of these products, which I thought were brilliant, because everything, of course, that I've created has been brilliant, and everything you've created up to date is brilliant as well. Why are some things accepted in the marketplace, and why are some things not accepted? And you know, I left Synamics about 15 years ago and have been working with maybe a dozen companies on an intensive basis since then as an investor, a director, and officer, and I keep asking the same question. Now, most of the companies that I've been working with have been successes, and the odd thing is you don't learn as much from your successes as you learn from your failures. So I luckily ended up co-founding a total failure a year and a half ago, and because of that, I learned something very fundamental that really influenced this question of how do you find the innovation sweet spot? How can you work to make sure what you're doing is going to have immediate market reaction that is successful? And oddly enough, I had a conversation with another company I'm involved in this morning about exactly that. We are now onto a completely different product range. The first one was, you know, not much of a success. It was a one-time, one-hit wonder that really worked and got some good money, but it couldn't be replicated. And we've managed to find something that's replicatable. And so we had this conversation again this morning, and the nut of it is, if you find the innovation sweet spot, it really isn't hard. You go to a company, and they'll buy it. You don't have to be good at marketing, you don't have to be good at sales, you don't have to be good at very much if you hit the absolute sweet spot. And if you hit that sweet spot, you can iterate fast enough that you can get it right for your customers, even if you blow it 15 times. So you're all pretty well at the stage of finding what that sweet spot is. Figuring out is what you're going to do going to meet some market success. So that's what I want to talk about today, is market success. And I want to do it a little bit differently. I want to make it from the perspective of the buyer. A lot of time you spend talking about the perspective of the entrepreneur. A lot of the things you learn are about the entrepreneur. I want to turn it and say it's more important to think about the perspective of the buyer than it is the entrepreneur. So, first question, what was the last innovative product you bought? When you look at it and you ask yourself the question when the last time you bought something innovative was, you don't come up with a very quick answer, do you? And in fact, how often in a year do you think you really innovate as a buyer? That's what you're selling into. You've all created something great, and you're trying to sell to people who don't innovate. And you, as innovators on the production side, have just self-declared as non-innovators on the buying side. And this is the biggest problem with innovation, is actually getting people to innovate. If you look at new product failure rates, they're really quite abysmal. There are something like 30,000 new products introduced in the US every year. This is not talking companies, this is just products from existing companies, existing markets, existing technologies. And the failure rate is about 70 to 90%. And you know, that's probably what I experienced at Synamics as a failure rate that high as that. We had some great ideas that just didn't go anywhere. So if you can imagine you're an entrepreneur and you're setting out to build something into a market where new product failure rates are 70 to 90%, there's a lot stacked against you. So, you know, has anybody heard of Webvan? Delivery of groceries? That, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars put into this company, and it went absolutely nowhere because the basic problem in delivering groceries is customers want to pick their fresh fruit themselves. And you have to give up something to go to Webvan. Segway. Has anybody here ridden a Segway? We actually have a few people. Okay, that's entertaining. Of course, you know that the owner of Segway went over a cliff on one and died. So it's true. It's not a very good advertisement for the Segway. But there's another product that they thought would revolutionize the world, but it was really a product in search of a market. And the other one is TiVo. Has anybody here used TiVo? Is it even available in Canada? It came out with this great fanfare and was an enormous failure. The world is littered with these things. In fact, there is a museum of failed products down in the United States that I've heard about that you can go and you can look at what has failed. They keep examples of them in case studies, etc. If you want to look at companies that have failed, because there are plenty of those, there's a website called autopsy.io. And it's just a very dead, simple website with an Excel interface. Okay, we've got a few people on it right away. And it's links to blogs about why my company failed. And it's really entertaining. So when you look at it, you've got an enormous challenge in getting a new product into the market as an innovation. The challenge is even more intense to get a new company in. So this is of startups, 27% are offering a product or service, 32% service, 41% product only. 75% of all startups fail, and 90% of all products fail. Now that's really interesting when you think of it, that 90% of products are failing from existing companies. So there's actually more success with entrepreneurship than there is for new product introduction of existing companies. The reason is that nobody's counting the number of failures that a startup has to go through to get it right. The number of things they have to do and things they have to try and ideas they come up with that they're going to fail at. So the key is, if you can find that innovation sweet spot, you have a much lower chance of being one of the failures. You'll be faster to revenue and faster to success. And you won't be this problem. 1,500 companies get venture capital funding in a typical year. It's a big number when you consider, though, that's only 1 or 2% of all the startups. So if you look at starting a business, only 1 or 2% will get venture capital funding. And of those getting venture capital funding, there's only a 12% success rate. Of the 1,500 companies or so that are financed, 50 will go public only. You see them, they're big now. They're waiting longer to go public at larger amounts, but only 50 or so will go public in any given year. Only 350 or so will sell, or sell out through mergers and acquisitions to another number buyer. So when you look at that, there are 1,100 of those companies that go nowhere. They never get sold, they never go public, they just die. Some maybe they limp along, they can earn a bit of money for their founders, etc., but most of them by then have burned through cash and they die. So you've got a success rate of 400 companies out of 15, but the problem with that is that only a quarter of those 400 actually earn a return more than 4 times the initial capital. And when you do the math, if you're not earning a return of 4 times the initial capital, it means the entrepreneur is getting nothing. Because of the way venture capital works, they get their money first, and they get it first in multiples before you get any. You have to earn a return that is really quite good in order to get them their money back a number of times before you get your money back. So you've got a 12% success rate. So I keep saying, okay, how do you make this better? California has figured it out. 53% of the venture funding goes into firms in California. 60% of the exits come from California. California is actually the only place where venture capital really works. The rest of the world, we look at Canada and say Canada's bad. Well, Canada is no worse off than Boston or Chicago or Denver or anything like that. We have a few successes and we've got lots of failures. The formula is essentially wrong. Now, you start to look then and say, okay, why is it that these things are failing? Why do these companies burn out so much? And there's a great, CB Insights is a great website, and those of you can go on CB Insights to see all their facts. So there are tons of facts about the venture capital community, their investments, and things like that. They have unicorn startup studies and all sorts of things about the ones that succeed. But this is a great one about why the top 20 reasons startups fail. First one here is no market need. 42%. Well, that's exactly the problem I'm talking about, is that people are starting businesses for which there's no market demand. That's what I did and failed abysmally at a year and a half ago. I started something that I thought was brilliant, and nobody was interested in it. So that's the thing that you have to avoid. There is no excuse for no market need. Interestingly enough, if you look at some of these, ran out of cash. Ran out of cash is probably also related to no market need. Is that you had cash, but you couldn't find the market soon enough. Because if you can find the market for what you're doing, you'll get cash. There is no problem getting cash if you've got a market. People will beat a path to your door if you are in the innovation sweet spot. They won't if you're not. So you got no financing, investor interest, pivot gone bad, product mistimed, all of these things, poor product, they all relate back to the same thing, is that people are starting something up for which there's no inherent need. So this is what I started to look at a number of years ago, is how can you identify when there's a need ahead of time and when there isn't a need, and save yourself countless hours of stupid work. Your success in this, we go back to the very beginning. You are trying to innovate with a product, but you yourselves don't buy innovation on a regular basis. And that's true of the whole market. The market is not used to buying innovation. And we're going to go through why they aren't and how you can identify that. But your success is overcoming humans' natural tendency not to innovate. And that's what I figured out over a long period of time, is that you've got to work around the problem that people don't like to innovate if you want to be successful. So the question is, why don't people innovate? And what is it that causes people to be non-innovative? And there are all sorts of reasons. Research says that people demand 2 to 4 times more money to give up a product than they're willing to pay to get it in the first place, which is really fascinating. People are naturally hoarders. They own something, they're reluctant to give it up, and so objectively, and if you like behavioral economics, which is a marvelous field, there's a researcher who's very popular by the name of Dan Ariely. And he goes through this behavioral economics type of research, and this is just one piece. This wasn't done by Dan, but it was done by lots of other people, to look at how people value what they have and what they could have. So the first thing is, if you own something, you're likely to value it 4 times as much as people are willing to pay to get it. Now, what does that mean when somebody says you can innovate? It becomes a bit of a problem, because you have an overvalued sense of what you own compared to what the innovation is. And there are several reasons for this. And the reason for this is this first area of what I call internal forces within your target customer that are working against you. So the first thing that is working against you are costs of innovation. So if you are out there asking somebody to innovate, they have a variety of costs that they must incur in order to be able to innovate. It's not just so much of, you've got a better product, you can save them money, but they've got transaction costs, they've got to buy your thing. If you're a big company, the process of buying something is incredibly complex. I was talking today with somebody who was trying to sell something to TELUS, and TELUS just laughed and said, sorry, it costs us $1 million to add a new product. Literally. So they can't just take on a new product and expect to try it out, because it's so expensive for them to go through the process of adding a new product to sell that it's at least $1 million for them to do it. So you have to be giving them something that has enormous benefit to get over that. Second thing is learning costs. Some things are really easy to learn and other things are hard. Now, who here is good at Adobe? Yeah, you got, why do you do this?
Infinite options to work with.
It's amazing, isn't it? And it's hard to figure out how to do anything on Adobe. But who here's got Macs? How easy is a Mac to learn? It's very easy. In fact, I switched from IBM to a Mac, 8 years ago. It took 15 minutes to make the switch. And I used iMovie for doing editing for years until I ruined it a bit, and I'd been hesitant to move to another format, but I used Final Cut, and because it's made by Apple, it took me 15 minutes to learn Final Cut. It was absolutely brilliantly easy. Apple does a great job of getting rid of those learning costs of adopting something. And I'm learning to use Adobe Photoshop now, and I'm struggling because they don't make it easy to adopt them. And if Apple brought out something that did the same thing as Photoshop, I'd probably adopt it very quickly, just because it's so easy. First cost, transactional. Second cost, learning. Third cost is obsolescence. You've got to make obsolete everything that you're doing now in order to do it. Now, if you're looking at the accounting side, sunk costs are meaningless, theoretically. But and people have emotional baggage that says that sunk costs are actually worth something, and this is an obsolescence cost. They think they're losing something there. And the last one is psychological costs. And psychological costs get into things like how we see ourselves. For instance, we see ourselves as Mac owners or Lenovo owners. And people who have Macs are actually very proud of owning Macs, aren't they? So those of you who have Macs, how quickly would you switch to a Lenovo or a Dell? You wouldn't. No, you see yourself as a Mac owner, and you value that, and you like the Mac owners club.
It's not even the club, it's the battery, the overheating of the laptop.
Okay, that's one way. So, so we've got transactional, learning, obsolescence, and psychological costs. And this is what the first big problem is, that switching costs are high. You're getting someone to switch from what they're doing now to something that you're trying to propose to them, and those costs are abnormally high. So you can't just sort of say, oh, we've got a better product, and it's logical that you would take it, because of the switching costs. And the other side of costs is their risks. So they've got risks of failure and all sorts of different risks associated with buying your new innovative product. And there are a number of biases that people have towards their innovations. The first is a status quo bias. And this is complex because consumers see a new benefit as a gain. So you're providing something that has a new benefit that they don't have. They see that as a gain. But they see a benefit that you take away as a loss. So in Webvan's case, the convenience of not having to go shopping was a gain, but the loss was not being able to pick your fresh fruit. Now, the funny thing is that consumers value losses more than they value gains, and the amount of the loss increases with the amount of time you've owned the product or you've associated with the service. So if you take somebody who's embedded into an idea or a way of doing things, and you propose to them that by adopting your innovation, they're going to lose something, the longer they've had that, the harder it is for them to do. The more difficult it is for them to innovate. There are other effects. There's an endowment effect. And this one's odd, because I hadn't heard of this one before I started to do research into this, is that consumers view what they own as part of their endowment. They recognize and build value onto that, and they assess innovations in terms of what they can gain and lose relative to their endowment. So it means that if they see themselves as surrounded by products that they've had a long time, that's part of their cultural makeup, their vision of themselves, etc., and they're going to lose from that, it is a definite loss that they're going to evaluate against your gain, and it is psychological. The other thing that I've said already is that people irrationally overvalue benefits that they currently obsess versus the ones that they're going to get when they get new. So Rich, do you have those numbers yet?
Yep.
So how much were people willing to sell their pencils for?
Well, $3.10.
What?
But it was skewed by one person that said $25. So
And if you take that,
if we take that out, it's $1.10.
and how much are people willing to pay to get them?
65 cents.
But that's skewed by one person who is willing to pay $5. This is
Yeah,
saying
so-
And how much did that, if you take the $5 off, what would you get?
We had like 35 cents.
Yeah.
So, it actually, the research worked absolutely perfectly. I mean, so obviously this
Who
research,
really liked their pencil for $25? Okay, nobody's gonna.
because I'll sell them another one.
The question is, who would have paid $5?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is actually absolutely proves what the research is saying, is that you value what you have more than you would actually pay to get it. So having gotten something, and it's more like a self-affirming prophecy, is that something you've paid for becomes great by the virtue you paid for it, and you need that. You need it to make yourself feel good so that you can affirm your own, the correctness of your own choice. And that gains over time. Like, yes, no one wants to say, oh, I made a stupid decision, I did a really, really stupid thing. And so they put extra value in what they've done, and they see that as great, and they would never pay that same amount again. So remember, when you're trying to sell something, that they value what they have more than the benefit of what you can bring them. The next factor is one that doesn't appear in the literature anywhere, and it's called the sloth factor. And the sloth factor is great because people are essentially lazy. It's easier to do what you've always done. You don't have to use extra physical effort, extra mental effort, extra emotional effort to keep doing the same thing. And people like that. They don't like expending energy. So you want them to expend some energy, and they're not going to bother doing it until it's really, really worth their while. So that's the sloth effect. The status quo requires no work. So when you're looking at consumers, and businesses, consumers, individuals, it doesn't matter which, is that they're overvaluing existing benefits tremendously. And executives, on the other hand, it's proven, are overvaluing the innovation benefits. So this is where you create a baby, and that baby is what you're going to take out there as an entrepreneur to sell to the world. You love what you've created, and your mother loves what you've created. So you look upon that as the next thing to sliced bread, and you're overvaluing it based on not only what it's worth in the marketplace, but what consumers will be willing to pay for it. And so that's a really big problem to get over. And what this creates is what's called the 9 times effect. And the 9 times effect comes from consumers are usually skeptical, unable to see the need for what you do, satisfied with their existing product, and quick to see what they own as the status quo. And that's your buyer. You, on the other hand, are convinced it works, likely to see a quick need, dissatisfied with the existing substitute, and not viewing the innovation, not viewing the existing thing as the benchmark. So what happens is consumers overweight their incumbent benefits, and you overweight your new product benefits, and the difference is 9 times. It's phenomenal. So you take a new existing product into somebody, and you're going to get a lot of yeah-yeahs. And the yeah-yeahs are yeah, well, that's interesting. Yeah, thanks. Tell me when it's more complete. Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much. The yeah-yeahs is this happening. You're thinking it's great. The consumer thinking it is just not there. So there are several things you can do about this. First is that you have to change people's behavior for them to innovate. Now, you have proven that you don't like changing your behavior, haven't you? Because you haven't really done much lately that you could call innovative, except buying a machine that fills water balloons for $8. That is the rank, the total value of the whole innovation by this room of people in the last month. So what you have in innovation is you've got to change people's behavior, and you have to have a better product. So when you look at it, if you have a high degree of behavior change required and a low degree of innovation on the product, you're going to have a sure failure. If you've got a low degree of change required, so people don't have to do much to be able to adopt your product, and you've got a low degree of product change, then you've got, easy sell. It's not complex to do, but it's not great results. If you've got high degree of product change, but high change of behavior, it's a long haul. You're going to be forever getting people to change what they do. And you don't want to be there because you can't get enough money to live through that. The place you want to be, and we're going to have another way of looking at this later, is you want to be where there's a high degree of product differentiation and a low degree of behavior change required. That's where you've got smash hits. That's the first of the things that I'll point out as one of the innovation sweet spots. You can't ask customers whether they like your product or not. What you have to ask them about is what they like about what they're doing now. So these three sets of questions are really good to use in market research, and you really need to address these before you start product development in order to get an understanding of what's going to inhibit your innovation internally in the hands of the customer. Do they have costs of learning, of transactions, of obsolescence, psychological costs? What are the behavioral changes that they need to undertake in order to be able to take on your product? And what are the benefits that they lose? Now, the interesting thing, I had a number of conversations. I had a chance on Friday to interview a number of people who have been through the Techno program before, and their pictures are up on the wall. And the conversation got around to this, and in some cases, it was absolutely clear once they understood the dynamics of the current ownership situation, they understood what they had to do to make a successful product. Because they could understand the product and what the customer is doing now from the customer's perspective and not from their perspective. The first thing we dealt with changes in the individual and all of the costs associated with bringing in a new innovation. And there are three forces operating here. Now we're going to deal with the second force. And the second force is something that you can bring to bear on the marketplace to improve your chances of success. And the way to think about this is that in order to succeed, you must do something that is radically different. It can't be just a bit different. It has to be radically different. The reason it can't be just a bit different is we've got all these forces that are inhibiting innovation that are going to stand in your way. So in order to get over those forces, you've got to do something that's absolutely stupendously different than exists now. And there are a number of ways at looking at being radically different. And this is where you come down to how you can differentiate. And there are only three ways that you can differentiate, in summary, between yourself and the competition or yourself and what exists now. And the first of these ways is quality. Now, there are thousands of different dimensions of quality that you can compete on, but essentially you're competing just on one thing, which is you've got a better quality. It could be quality of service, it could be quality of the visual look and appeal, it could be quality of feeds and speeds if it's a computer. If you look at Apple, Apple decided many years ago that the most important part of their product was quality. And they built all of their packaging, all of their instructions, all of their service, all of their products around this, what they saw as their image of quality. Now, interestingly enough, that's not what everybody thinks is the right image of quality. For instance, my son, who's a computer scientist, can't stand Apple products because he can't take pieces out the inside and put other pieces in. He laughs at me for the fact that I love Apple and I'm littered with Apple products. His last computer was a Raspberry Pi, and he bolted it to the back of his old TV and declared that his next computer. So you can't do that with Apple. To him, quality means something different than it means to me. And so it's important to understand what target market you're after and what your quality says. When Apple took this dimension of quality, they also enabled themselves to charge the highest price in the market. Because those of us who are foolish enough to buy Apple paid 3-4 times as much. And Apple, as a result of charging twice the price, what do their profits look like?
They have more money in government.
They have, their profit after tax is something like in excess of 20%. Because when you pick the quality dimension on which to compete, then you can drive profits the way nobody else can. At Cynamics, we believed in that, and I would go into customers and say that our product is twice as expensive as any of our competitors. You can ask them, you'll be amazed, and you'll buy our products, because what we've done is we've made sure that our systems will never go down. They will never fail, and we'll give you money back if our systems fail. We were selling to telephone companies, and telephone companies hate products going down. If you're anybody still have a landline? 1 or 2 people have a landline. Do you remember landlines? When you had landlines, did they ever fail? Landline never failed, did it? Because the telephone company has zero tolerance for failure. So we engineered our products to meet their need of zero tolerance for failure. As a result, we could charge twice as much as the competitors who all fought it out for a different segment of the marketplace. So that's the quality dimension. So that's the first way you can compete. The second way you can compete is speed. And there are a number of different ways of looking at speed, but one way of looking at it is to look at it Dell's way. Now, Dell has been in the market along with, and I use these because they're easily understood by people. When you're buying a Dell, they haven't even bought the parts that they're going to use to build your computer yet. So you could go into a store and buy a Lenovo at a store, or you could order from Dell. When you order from Dell, they will then order the parts. So the parts that you're getting are the very newest parts in the marketplace. You're not getting any old parts because they have no inventory. Lenovo had to buy the inventory 6 months ago to make your product 3 months ago to get it on the shelves today, in which case, you know, their speed to market is slow, Dell's is fast. The third dimension, I said you can compete on 3 dimensions only, that's quality, speed, and cost. Hundreds of people, Lenovo used to be IBM, so hundreds of people decided to use the cost element to compete on when the computer market started up. Where are they now? The ones who competed on cost are dead, because eventually someone else will come in to compete with a slightly lower cost and a slightly lower cost. So when you try and build an innovative product that competes on cost, you're going to just get out-costed by somebody with a better system. What I heard today was a story about Nelson Rockefeller. In the early days when he was running Standard Oil, what he figured out was how to compete based on cost. And what he did was that he assembled the barrels for oil out of wood from the forests that were around the oil wells. And he built the barrels and heat treated them so that they were 50% of the weight of competing barrels. So he lowered his cost through integration with different parts of the supply chain. So instead of buying his barrels, he produced his own barrels, lowered the weight so much that it influenced the cost in getting to the marketplace. He dominated the market in terms of cost for a long period of time and was able to succeed that way. Cost is a very difficult one, though, in order to be able to compete on. But this is where you get your power. And it's the only thing that you get your power on, is you get your power to differentiate your product. And you've got to select in the beginning how you're going to differentiate, and then you've got to figure how much you're differentiated. So as I said before, you have to be really differentiated. If you want to have difference, you have to have a major difference in quality, or a major difference in cost, a major difference in speed. You've heard of You've heard of blue ocean strategies? So, you know, Henry Ford brought out the Model T, and he priced it at 1/3 of the price of regular automobiles at the time. And he did that so the average person could afford a car. So previously, the average price of a car was around $2,250. Ford brought them out for $750, radically brought the cost down into what is essentially a blue ocean, capturing a whole new marketplace because of lowering the benefits and lowering the cost simultaneously. So we move on then to the third dynamic here. As I said, we talked about the internal forces that are inhibiting people from innovating, including the sloth factor. We talked about what you can bring to bear by being differentiated. The last thing we're going to talk about is why don't businesses innovate? Because when you're selling to businesses, you actually have a 2-stage sale. Is you're selling to a business and you're selling to an individual buyer within a business who operates like a consumer. So when you're selling to a consumer, you don't have the business influence, but you're selling to a business, it gets a lot more complex. People say, you know, find a problem, but it isn't enough. In effect, what you have to find instead of finding a problem is finding a budget that's waiting to be spent. So we're going to go through and look at a variety of things, and it really depends on, this is really how a business behaves and how a business works through this prospect of innovating. So the first thing you have to do is you have to have what you have as a solution for must be identified by the buyers as a problem. And sometimes you get out to solve something that isn't identified by the buyers as a problem, and you've got a real problem there. If you're not in agreement as to what the problem, if they don't see the same problem that you see, then you're never going to get anywhere. And I had a good chat with a number of these companies, and in one example, they really said that the first time they tried something, they were a product in search of a market. And what you don't want to be is in product in search of a market, because you tend to make up problems. And when you make up problems and then go and see if people have them, it doesn't get you anywhere. What you want to do is find the problem first before making up a solution. Now, it was the case where I failed abysmally in the last 18 months was a case where we thought we were smarter because we thought we knew what the problem was because we'd been in that situation. But we got a misread on the problem, and as a result, the buyers didn't see it. Many years ago, I was involved with a company called Dionix Green Tree Technologies, and they built a huge tablet to enable lumber yards to estimate cost of materials used in building a house. And they were solving a problem, they thought, of how long it took to estimate the production of these estimates and better quality estimates. As it turned out, that wasn't a problem at all. There were many more other problems that the companies had to deal with. So the first thing is, in a business case, you must solve a problem that they see as a problem. The second thing is, in a business, someone must own that problem. And there are problems in businesses that people don't own. So in one company I was with, we developed strategy execution software to help people do a better job executing strategy. It is acknowledged by Harvard Business Review that the biggest problem companies have is executing strategy. So we built software to enable them to do that. But what we found out is that no one inside those companies is responsible for strategy execution. So there's nobody to sell to. And in fact, the greatest way to prove it is I went on LinkedIn once and typed, you can do a search of all of your close contacts. I typed in strategic planning. And I think I got something in the order of 8 million hits in my extended network on the term strategic planning. Everybody claims to do it. And I got 80,000 hits on strategy execution. Everybody out there is responsible for strategic planning, and no one is responsible for strategy execution. And if you don't have a good LinkedIn network, the other way of finding out if there's somebody who owns the problem is go on Google AdWords. You can do the same thing on Google AdWords and see how many queries there are for a particular thing. If you type in strategic planning, you get tons of hits on strategic planning as a search term. You type in strategy execution, you get almost none. So if you want to see how popular what you're doing is and whether somebody owns the problem, just use those two resources to see if people are putting it in their resumes and searching because they've got to find a solution to it. So that's the second one. Somebody's got to own the problem. The third thing is that problem owner has got to wake up every day trying to solve this problem. And there are some problems that exist that people own, but that no one is waking up every day to solve. And that's what Excel's for. Because you can get Excel to do so many different things in the world of business that you can solve most of your problems poorly with it. And once you've solved it just enough, then it really isn't a problem you've got to deal with anymore. You're not waking up every day to solve it. I was working with a company that FSC Technologies a number of years ago that had asset management maintenance software for the mining industry. Beautiful software, it was great, did lots of things, but none of the small and mid-sized mines wanted to use it because they used Excel and it was good enough and it met their needs for now. The benefits weren't there. So somebody has to be waking up every day trying to solve the problem. And this is where it becomes really easy. If you've got a problem that people are waking up every day trying to solve, you're not going to have a hard time selling it to them. But if you haven't got these things in line, you're going to have a very difficult time selling. Lastly, and most importantly, these people you're selling to have to have a budget. If they don't have a budget, whatever you're talking about is no good. You know, they teach you how to sell, and the first thing they say is find out how much their budget is. But they don't tell that to entrepreneurs. You shouldn't be looking for a problem. You should be looking for a budget waiting to be spent. Because when there's a budget, it means that somebody has recognized the problem and somebody owns it, and that they're waking up every day to solve it. if there is no budget, then you don't have a problem to deal with. One of the quickest ways of doing market research is to go find out what budget people have to solve problems. And if you're getting nothing back, it means you're doing something wrong. You can figure out what you're doing wrong easily once you found that, but you can skip to the end. In order to move people away from this issue of not being willing to innovate, there must be some external force pushing people to innovate. So this is the third dynamic that I'm talking about, the third force in the marketplace. Does anybody know what this formula is? Buoyancy? Okay, this is great. I just went on, you know, when I look for pictures doing a talk, I just wrote external force and got this. I thought it looked pretty good. I hadn't the faintest idea what it was. So I put it up there figuring it must be an external force. It's under Google Images as an external force. So thank you for the fact it's buoyancy. This is the problem when you get a non-scientist to give a talk like this. I thought I should put something like this in there, and I have a treat for you in the next one as well. It's not a chemical. I'm sorry I didn't do anything chemical-wise, but I did something physics-wise. So you've got internal forces that are preventing people from buying an innovative product. You bring to bear some differential force. But there's one thing that has to be there. There must be some external force as well that causes people to innovate. So not only do you have to have a differentiated product, but these lazy people you're trying to sell to must be influenced by something external to themselves to get them over the hurdle. And it's important to align yourself with these external forces. Newton's first law applies to business and consumers. And that's what people don't realize, is that you've got to push somebody to do something, and it can't be just you trying to sell them something. Something else has to push them as well. So I want to look at the four major forces that push people to move in a marketplace. So the first is beautiful. It's regulatory. If the government says you have to do something, people will do it. This is the opportunity that the Canadian government is missing in trying to improve innovation in the country. They try and provide financing at the back end. The easiest thing they could do is to provide an impetus to require people to innovate. And there are some great examples of that. You might have heard of Justin Bieber. Justin Bieber exists as a star performer, or existed last year as a star performer, whatever you might want to look at it, because of a law made by the Canadian government 30 some odd years ago. I can't even remember the date. And it's only because of the law made by the Canadian government that Justin Bieber exists and you can curse and swear at him. What the government said is there is no Canadian music industry. And literally there wasn't. There was Don Messer's Jubilee, and no one will have heard of Don Messer's Jubilee. You can Google it. Canada did not have performers. They did not have recording studios. They didn't have our artists. They didn't have people writing music because there was no market for it. So the Canadian government said, okay, we've got these regulated airwaves. If you want access to our regulated airwaves, you must play Canadian content X% of the time between the hours of A and B. It's very simple. So the market went around saying, okay, where can we get Canadian content? And they paid people to produce content so that they could play it on the radio. It cost the government nothing to create a music industry that is today absolutely enormous. And our success in the music industry is just due to that one regulation. You can look at other markets. California and electric cars. California said a certain percent of cars must be electric. You can look at the drone market today. In the United States, which is heavily regulated, you're not allowed to fly drones. Canada is much more willing to fly drones, so we have a drone industry growing in Canada that's inhibited in the United States. The most powerful external force that can operate in an industry is regulatory. So if you want to find some way to get really quick market reaction, find something that you can do that meets a regulatory need. The second, and these forces are declining orders of magnitude. The second force is a strategic force. And you can, in individuals, this is a societal force. So a strategic force exists because your competitor has done something and you've got to respond. So a number of years ago at Cynamics, there was something called the Mic network that allowed radio phones to use hot buttons to communicate between people over a non-cellular network. And some people had the Mic network and other people didn't, and our customers needed a competitor to the Mic network to be able to say they had it. And we got all sorts of sales, very stupidly, because they needed to meet this competitive response. You can look at all sorts of situations where Apple versus BlackBerry. I mean, BlackBerry was wiped out by a strategic response by Apple in the cell phone industry, because Apple said, we can make a new product and we'll make it so much better that we can move people. But even today, if you read, there's an article in Fast Company, and it's about the people who are going to work for Obama's tech startup in the White House. He's got a whole bunch of people, and they're handed BlackBerries when they join. And they groan with dismay at the fact that they've got these BlackBerries. So this war, the strategic war, exists between members, and you can look at the responses of Samsung and Google and BlackBerry and Apple, and they're all trying to beat each other out. So if you can help somebody compete with their competition, either meet their competition or exceed their competition, there's a high demand for what you're doing. Now the same thing exists with consumers, but in consumers it's a societal pressure. Why did you join Facebook? Because I don't need to ask who here isn't on Facebook. Most of you will be on Facebook, right? Why are you on it? Because your friends are on it. Were you on it before your friends were on it? Probably not. There will be a few innovators, but once you get a few people and they start talking it up, society has this force, this pressure that comes to bear. Now, you can look upon a lot of environmental issues. Some of them are regulatory, but some of them are societal forces. I mean, you don't want to be a polluter. Some of the things that boards do, they do because there's just, like being corporate social responsibility is something that society is bringing a pressure on the company to do something, so they respond to that pressure. Individuals respond to pressure on fashion and clothing on a regular basis. Not normally people who come from fields of science. But if you're looking at the social sciences, most of them dress more fashionably, shall we say, and as a result, they're watching what people are doing and influenced by those pressures. So the first and best force is regulatory, the second best force is strategic. The third gets into a realm of operational and technological. There are some things you have to do to stay current. Now, every now and then, Microsoft has to delist support from old Windows. I think most recently there was Windows 97 or something they stopped supporting. But they'll support really old things. People don't need to, and you can go into businesses nowadays that have old computer desktops and old software running on those desktops because they still work and still enable the company to do the things they need to do to operate. When they break, when the company can't operate the way it needs to, it will then turn and say, you know, I've got this operational need that I have to solve by some form of new innovation. For an individual, it's technological. You know, eventually, you're not going to be able to make calls on old cell phones. The market, the environment within which you're making calls, the network will have changed and your old cell phone won't work and you'll have to upgrade. So there are technological forces. Sometimes those forces are really positive. The internet's a really positive force because sometimes they are enablers of new applications and things. So for instance, there's a great technological wave that is now possible, and lots of companies are strategically responding by bringing out applications for directly for iPhones and other internet-enabled devices because there's a technological capability that's a force acting through the marketplace to get people to move. The last of the forces is economic financial, and it is the lowest order of force that exists. And the reason for that is the economic side of it only happens once every 7 years or so. Once every 7 years, we get a recession. And whenever we have a recession, or hopefully not a depression, people operate in a different mode of thinking. So when they start operating that way, they will do all sorts of things to save money that they wouldn't normally need to do. And that's when there are opportunities to bring out products that are more cost-oriented, less feature-oriented, and you can innovate in that dimension. In company terms, the same sorts of things happen, is that people say, you know, I've got a product that can save a company lots of money. Companies don't care about saving money unless they start developing financial difficulties. So every now and then they will have a financial problem. And when they have overall financial problems, they're going to try and save money, and they'll turn to innovative new ways of saving things. But if they're not having financial difficulties, they aren't going to care if they're spending too much on their liquid soap dispenser in their washrooms. They just won't. It's not worth the cost of switching. It's not worth the innovation of the expenditure of effort. And you know why? It's because they've got a rank order list of things they've got to solve. They have to solve regulatory things, and then strategic things, and then operational things. And if they finish solving all of those things, they're going to turn to solve financial problems. The same things exist in consumer marketplaces. It's only when people really have to that they actually turn and try and save money. So that's an external force that's really weak that you don't want to rely on except at certain times in certain marketplaces. Now, I've got to go back to Airbnb as a good example, because I think Airbnb is a case where people all of a sudden needed to save money and were more willing to stay in people's houses in order to save money. And so the opportunity existed in a marketplace. But in a marketplace that's flush with cash, something like Airbnb wouldn't happen. There's another TED Talk that was by, and I can't remember his name either, so sorry about that. It's the founder of IDEO. So if you punch in IDEO, he says that the one factor that explains most of success of his 100 companies, not IDEO, sorry, Idea Lab. The one factor that explained the success of his 100 companies and 100 others was timing. But my belief is that timing is associated with one of these other four elements happening. Is that when one of these four external forces are aligned with what you're doing, and which is aligned with the inhibitors of innovation, that things work. When you look at it, I have to do a better job with this slide, but I just did it up quickly. Where you've got a high external force and low differentiation, you're going to get outcompeted in the marketplace. You're looking for high external forces, but you'll get outcompeted. If you've got low external force and low differentiation, nothing's going to happen. You're not going to get anywhere. You're not going to make any sales. If you've got high differentiation, but the low external force, you might get somewhere, but it's going to be awfully slow. It's going to take a long time. And if you have high external force and high differentiation, you have a chance of success as long as your differentiation and the external force can get over the internal forces that inhibit innovation. But if you can't get over those things won't matter. And I can't draw a cube, but basically that's what you're looking at, is a cube to evaluate what you're doing. You've got to critically evaluate what you're doing and how you're doing it in order to figure out where you fit. So the sweet spot, the next question is how to figure out you're in the sweet spot. You've got to be talking to customers from day one. And the story that Lou Nanno's told of every year going to a particular conference where the nurses were talking about problems in client care enabled them to figure out, because they got to know people, what the problems were. And when they found out what the problems were, they were able to figure out better solutions than they had originally come up with. So it's absolutely critical that you're talking, and everybody should be telling you this, talk to customers from day one. When you talk to the customers, find out what they're doing now. I don't know why I picked the Spice Girls for that, but when you type in things in Google, I thought, well, what are they doing now? Yeah, I wonder. So you have to figure out what the consumers are doing now as part of your research. So you can't ask them, would you like this product? You've got to find out, what are you doing at the current time, and what are going to be your costs of switching? So you have to say, if we had a new innovative product, you don't even have to discuss the innovative product itself. You have to discuss what are the costs of switching? What are the risks involved in switching? How will you buy a new product? How will you evaluate it? What are some of the behavioral issues? As the next one, how wedded are they to what they're doing now? What's the status quo effect, the endowment effect? What are they going to give up? What are they going to lose in order to be able to take your product in? So far, you haven't asked a single question of, would you like my product? You're just finding stuff out about them entirely. And then figure out what the corporate issues are. If you're selling to a corporation, figure out what their priorities are. All sorts of questions. So what are the problems that you're currently trying to solve? What are the problems for which you've allocated a budget? What are the various problems, strategic or regulatory, that are going to get away of this problem being solved? If you're really good, what you can do is take an operational problem and make it a strategic problem by understanding what their business strategy is and being able to help them compete strategically. And that's a real key. If you can move what you're doing. This is when people talk about pivoting, that's what they're effectively doing. They're pivoting into a different external force, a different internal force, etc. Finally, something you could, yeah, go ahead.
Can you give an example on how you would do this? Because I feel like if you approach a company, they wouldn't just start telling you, oh, these are our problems and these are our weak points.
Well, you have to get to...
Especially if you're like a startup.
You'd be surprised at how often people are willing to help you. You'd be really surprised. In fact, my partner in Cynamics used to start his cold calls with, I wonder if you can help me. Everybody here, all of you really strong innovators, if somebody asks you for help, what's your natural response? You usually try and help, don't you? You don't say, go to hell. So if you start out with, look, I'm trying to evaluate a new set of products, could you help me? They really like helping students, so play on the fact that you're a student at U of T doing this project, and they feel it's part of their duty to help. So, and most people, if you can bring them something of value, are willing to help you. So if you can help inform them about other things that are going on in their industry at the same time, or we've talked to 20 people, we found this is a problem, do you find it as a problem? Is a way of doing it. And then they're interested to find out what the other 20 people said at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
So, figuring out, using this as a guide, how are you differentiated? And really critically examine that. Get other people to look at your degree of differentiation and tell you whether it matters. And this doesn't have to be potential customers. It could be somebody knowledgeable in the industry that wouldn't be a customer. Probably best to look at your differentiation and say, that's not very good. You're not much different than them, or that's just a feature level difference. It's not very high. It's not going to attract it. You don't want to ask people the questions that are going to be able to yah you, give you just nice, oh yeah, it's a great idea. You want to ask them questions that force them to quantify things like, how much different do you think we are than this? How much do you think this is worth, etc. Then you've got to ask what external forces you're relying on. And this is a deep understanding of the marketplace and what's influencing the marketplace, both for consumers and for corporations, to figure out how they're going to buy and what you're going to buy. Essentially, all of this is figuring out why the buyer wouldn't innovate. You've got to take the other stance. You're looking at everything from the perspective of an innovator who's is building a new product. You've got to take yourself into the eyes of the consumer and say, how's the consumer going to look at this? What are the critical potential pitfalls in this from the eyes of the consumer? What are the things that are going to inhibit their innovation for you to be successful, to get over those? The problem is that many, many companies, and I have done this once, I won't do it again, is come out with a product and a solution before trying to sell it. And I know the stats for software, but in the software industry in the US, they spend as much on sales and marketing as they do on R&D from the first day they're in business. They don't wait. In Canada, we build a product and then go out to the market to get reaction. And we're not as successful at innovation. And there are all sorts of other reasons behind these forces that we could talk about later, if you wanted, on why Canada is not successful in innovation.
Well, you don't want to wait until you develop the product. But what about develop a prototype and then show it and then?
No.
Because I did the exact thing. I did not develop anything, and then I started to build on top of the feature, and I realized that, well, it's still not good enough. So maybe something wrong with the interview process or something.
Yeah. No, you should be talking to customers and really understand the market entirely before. The best example is in a book called The 4-Hour Workweek. It's a great book, but it describes how Tim Ferriss goes about the process of evaluating whether a new product would work. So he used the examples of a French shirt. And what he did was he took out a website and bought AdWords associated with the sale of a French shirt. And so people would go on, see the shirt, click on, I want to buy, enter their credit card and everything, push purchase, and then he'd say, oh, sorry, we're out of stock, you'll have to wait till we're in stock. He didn't have any of the products. He didn't have anything. All he did was see how many people would buy it, figured out the dynamics of how many dollars it would cost to buy AdWords and what his revenue would be for buying those AdWords before actually launching the product. There are all sorts of people doing this in the internet nowadays, examining. Basically, Kickstarter is exactly that. Kickstarter is a perfect example of figuring out how many people will buy something before producing it and asking these same questions through your Kickstarter approach. So you have to be, don't wait till the product is done to sell it. All of these things you've got to start figuring out from day one. And over time I'm going to develop this quasi-framework thing that I've got to enable people to keep track of this type of thing. Because as you're going through and evaluating ideas, you need to be changing your results and constantly going back to this thing. Because if you're having problems in the marketplace, it's probably somewhere in here that you're having problems with.